How do I internalize the mistakes and actual fallacies I overlooked to not miss a similar question next time? Great question. How do I internalize? How do I see those patterns? Part of it is doing a large volume of questions in a relatively short period of time. And that way, you will start to see the connections more and more. Part of it's also doing a large volume of questions. And you don't want to cram this. I'm not saying do 3 or 4 exams in the final week. Like I said earlier, that's too much. But you do want to study over a long enough period of time such that you've done a good 10 exams at least. And that's 500 LR questions and 250 games questions, 250 reasoning questions. And you've got enough under your belt that you could better see those patterns. One thing you can do is do questions by type. So that could be for LR question stem type. For games, that could be game type. But there's also patterns in methods of reasoning. And that's a bit tougher to spot. No one categorizes it that way for LR, in part because it would take far too long to categorize everything that way. It's not as immediately apparent as it is for, let's say, logical reasoning question stems. But through your review process, if you are writing things out rather than just saying, oh yeah, I get it when you look at the correct answer choice, you're actually writing out, maybe even by hand in a notebook if you want to be old-fashioned about it. Also because writing in a notebook has a higher retention rate and a higher engagement rate. If you're typing, the letter D is no different than the letter H to your fingers, other than which finger you're pressing. But when you write things down, you're actually solidifying the concepts in your brain more thoroughly. And that means maybe you're more likely to remember when you get a question wrong that it was similar to an earlier method of reasoning. On my website, under the logical reasoning tab, I have one article titled 2 tough flaw questions that were similar to each other, or something like that. These were 2 questions that were about 20 exams apart from each other. One was like in the 30s and one was in the teens. And I noticed that they had very similar flaws. And these were weird flaws. These were more abstract flaws. And these sorts of flaws, these methods of reasoning, might only show up once every 10 exams. And so if you're only doing 5 or 10 exams, you're not necessarily going to have a large enough data set to see those patterns. But the more exams that you do, the more patterns you'll be exposed to. Also, you might want to work through flaw questions by flaw type specifically. On my website, under the logical reasoning tab, I have a spreadsheet that's also a list. And it lists various question types. And in the flaw category, you can see in parentheses for many of them which classic logical fallacy they exhibit. And because there are so many fallacies, you might only have 10 questions ever that exhibit a particular fallacy within the flaw question stem category. But if you do all 10 of those in a row, you'll really solidify your understanding of what that method of reasoning is. Another thing you could do is you could go through the abstract language in flaw answer choices. Even if the correct answer was A, you could go through B, C, D, and E, which are worded very abstractly perhaps. They might use words like takes the consequent to mean the antecedent or something like that, which is referring to necessary and sufficient conditions. But if you actually parse out what all that abstract terminology means, you will be deepening your understanding of how flaws are described in the abstract, how an ad hominem flaw might be described, or how a correlation causation flaw might be described, so that when you predict or prephrase the flaw for yourself, you will actually recognize it in the answer choices when it comes up.